blue medallion.
I first played Outlast back in January of 2017. The thing that stood out to me immediately about the game was the cover. Something about that gruesome image of Chris Walker depicted in the green hue of the game's iconic night vision. I've always loved horror and horror games, so naturally I felt compelled to see what it was all about. The thing about Outlast is that out of all the horror games I've ever played, it is hands down the one that I dreaded going back to the most. It's not really the kind of game that you just play for fun. Outlast, above all else, is an experience. That's honestly the best way I can put it. It's a roller coaster ride of a horror game that spends more time off the rails than it does on. In this video, I will seek to answer a single question. Is Outlast still scary 12 years later? To do this, I will look at the production, the story, gameplay, and more. By doing this, I hope to determine what makes independent game studio Red Barrel's debut title not only so horrifying, but influential as well. So with that in mind, strap in and join me for the tense, adrenaline-fueled nightmare known as It's kind of funny. With horror films, it's easy to retreat behind a blanket or cover your eyes during the scary parts. With horror games, you are inserting yourself into a terrifying situation, and you literally can't progress without actively engaging with the environment. Bro, there's no one here. Just go on about your day, bro. I know you got important shit to do down in these sewers. I don't want to get in the way of that, man. In Outlast, you are virtually defenseless. There are many horror games where you are at the very least armed with some sort of weapon. In Outlast, you have nothing but your trusty video camera. Your only options in Outlast are run and hide. That's quite literally it. And it makes sense, given that in the game, you aren't really playing as a fighter of any kind. You play as Miles Upshur, an investigative journalist who receives an anonymous tip that something shady is going on at Mount Massive Asylum and decides to go investigate alone, hoping to make a discovery that will blow the lid off of a major conspiracy of some kind, and possibly make a name for himself in the process. With that being said, let me just say that Miles Upshur is without a doubt the most dedicated independent journalist of all time. The amount of shit that he goes through in this game in order to expose what's going on, truly ridiculous. He really should get a promotion or Employee of the Month or something like that. That aside, let's get into the history of Outlast. As we've already said, the game was created by Red Barrels, which was a very small team of just 10 people at the time.
The company was co-founded by 3 people, Hugo, David, and myself. Very quickly, as soon as we got the money, of course, we hired Régent, lead programmer, Alexandre Sabourin, tech artist, and eventually we shipped the first game with 10 people total. For Outlast 2, we were 20, and now we're just a little above 40.
Outlast was technically Red Barrel's first game, although the team had previously been a part of Ubisoft, and had experience working on AAA titles like Assassin's Creed and Splinter Cell. Despite being a small team, this AAA experience was vital in allowing Red Barrels to craft such a fully realized, effective experience in Outlast, and later Outlast 2 and the Outlast Trials, which I plan to discuss in their own videos in the future. Outlast's style of run and hide over run and gun was inspired by another iconic horror game, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which is a game I have played a bit but never actually completed. Let me know if I should check that one out in a future video. Amnesia was a successful game for many reasons, but the one that Red Barrels likely sought to emulate was the immersive, psychological gameplay component. Outlast and Amnesia are described as being psychological survival horror games. When it comes to horror game subgenres, People can get pretty granular and even argue over what is technically considered to be survival horror. Survival horror as a subgenre is most commonly associated with franchises like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. These franchises began back in the 90s and implemented a few core tenets that became synonymous with the phrase survival horror. These being backtracking, fixed camera angles, and resource management. These three pillars of gameplay are what purists will say define survival horror, and any game without these things cannot be described as being survival horror games, according to some people.
Survival horror should be defined by the game that created it. And I think that's about as simple as the argument gets. So does this game play like Resident Evil 1? No. All right, that's not survival horror, because that's all we have as a baseline foundation for what survival horror is the game that not only coined the term, but created the genre. And I think everybody seems to think that that is the most absurd thing in the world. It's like, I mean, we do that for everything else. For example, a third-person shooter. Why is it not a first-person shooter? Oh, because the camera angle's different. That's it. That's the only difference between the two, first person and third person. Okay, we have a different camera angle. So why not do that for survival horror and any other type of horror genre? Does it have, I don't know, exploration with backtracking, a limited inventory with combat being an option but being disincentivized? Does it have all the things that Resident Evil 1 has? No? Okay, then it doesn't mean it's a bad game, and it doesn't mean it's not a horror game. It just means it's not survival horror, the same way when the sky is blue, it's certainly not red. And I don't think that that's a value statement. It's just people are defining survival horror because it's been such a nebulous subject for so long.
Sure.
I mean, think about it. We haven't had a honest-to-goodness survival horror game in decades. So, like, reviewers who want to sound like they're really, really smart and understand video games, and they want to use survival horror, so we'll all go, ooh, impressive, he knows about video games, when in reality, they're playing Condemned Criminal Origins, which I think we can all agree, great horror game, just top of the line, killer horror game, just not survival horror.
I think Outlast is not a survival horror game.
Precisely. And you know what? I think that there's a very good reason for that. And I already touched on it. Survival horror games have to have combat as an option. Now, most of the time, it's disincentivized. Like, for example, Silent Hill 1. You're not going to kill every monster you come across. And if you do, it's always going to be a drain on your resources.
I bring all this up because Outlast has none of these things. It's a different style of horror game. One inspired by not only Amnesia, but by found footage horror films like Wreck from 2007, and its American remake, Quarantine. However, if we're getting technical, survival is the key component of Outlast. This game triggers your fight or flight instincts constantly, except there is no fight, only flight. Creating a scenario where you play as a regular person in a horrifying setting is ultimately what Red Barrel's aimed to achieve. When you compare Outlast to Resident Evil, arguably the most popular horror series of all time, the differences are noticeable right away. Resident Evil can be pretty scary as well, but you aren't constantly fearing for your life like in Outlast. You can fight back in Resident Evil. But for a realistic, immersive scenario like the one found in Outlast, that's not really going to make sense. Most people, like Miles, don't know how to use a gun, and aren't trained in hand-to-hand combat, and that's what Outlast captures so well. Outlast puts you in a situation where you have to rely on stealth and awareness of your surroundings. Outlast requires you to take notice of the environments to quickly and efficiently progress through the asylum. There is no map, so you have to observe signs and warnings written in blood in order to survive the ordeal. These and the batteries you find throughout the asylum are really your only resources. Being aware of the layout of the asylum, knowing where exits and important locations are, will make your life a lot easier when it comes time to make a break for it, which happens quite a bit. Outlast is a game that will live and die by how much you let the circumstances affect you. You know what? I don't even give a fuck. What's up, bitch? If you're someone who gets really scared and unwilling to make confident strides when enemies are nearby, the game is going to really test your limits. You will often find yourself in situations where you're quite literally frozen with fear. If you can get yourself to a point where you can just say fuck it and run for your life and hope for the best, which is where I landed for most of my second playthrough, you will make progress faster, but you will miss out on some of the light exploration that the game has to offer. Outlast is a mostly linear, on-rails experience. There are documents throughout the asylum for you to discover, which help further explain the lore and the events that have been going on at Mount Massive. There are parts of the game where you will revisit areas you've been before, but it's mostly for narrative reasons rather than any exploration purposes. Outlast is a 4 to 5 hour game, depending on how quickly you're able to run through the horrors of Mount Massive. If you're analytical enough, you can very easily downplay the game and sort of just memorize the layout of the asylum, almost like a speedrunner would. Outlast has 4 difficulty modes, starting with normal, hard, nightmare, and finally insane, which is essentially a permadeath mode where any instance of dying will force you to restart the game. I think we just want to do normal. This game's already stressful enough. I'm not a masochist, so I just played on normal for this video for the sake of not making my life too difficult. In Outlast, it's easy to get stuck in a gameplay loop where you're too scared to want to risk getting too close to the enemies in the game, and opt instead for a stealthy approach. But if you know where to go, which is actually pretty unintuitive at times, you can trivialize the experience to a large degree. For many players, the first playthrough will be the most immersive and the most fun. I highly recommend playing with the lights off and your headset on. Even going as slow as you can, the game is still not an experience that overstays its welcome. It's more meant to tell an immersive story, almost like an interactive found footage film like I alluded to before. Outlast is priced affordably as well. Usually you can get it on sale, and it's never claiming to be anything more than a game most people will play once, say, fuck, that was intense, and move on from. Which is a perfectly respectable place for a studio's first game to be. They weren't trying to reinvent the wheel or anything like that, they just wanted to create an immersive experience. Outlast was made on a budget of only 1 million Canadian dollars, generously invested by the Canada Media Fund, which is a fund that is used to help develop original Canadian content. The game was incredibly successful, making $64 million against its $1 million budget. So, safe to say that the Canada Media Fund made a good investment there. Alright, now it's time to get into spoilers. We're going to talk about the entire story of Outlast, so if you don't want any spoilers, I would recommend you go, play Outlast. It'll take you around 4 to 5 hours, and then you can come back and enjoy the video. Like I mentioned earlier, you play as Miles Upshur, an investigative journalist who receives an anonymous tip regarding Mount Massive Asylum. The hospital is owned by the Murkoff Corporation, a shady corporate entity with a sordid past that we will learn more about as we go. One common criticism of Outlast that I would like to address here is the lack of characterization on the part of Miles Upshur. He's sort of a blank slate, meant to be more of an audience surrogate for us to map our emotions and feelings onto, as opposed to a fully fleshed out three-dimensional character. Red Barrels heard this critique and greatly improved upon it in Outlast 2. The only things we really know about Miles are that he is a journalist and that he likely must have played some sports in high school. Bro's stamina is literally infinite. Right away, Miles arrives and things are in a state of disarray, eventually giving way to grisly scenes of murder and just general chaos. Early on in the game, Miles claims that he can't leave the way that he came in, but I'm calling bullshit. He absolutely could have turned around upon seeing the bodies of the private military soldiers employed by Murkoff and jumped through a window or something. I suppose it's easy for me to say because as the player I know what Miles is in for, but I digress. One of the aforementioned soldiers tells Miles before dying that the inmates are now quite literally running the asylum. This first section of the game has Miles exploring the administration ward in an attempt to unlock the main entrance by gaining access to the security control room. The game teases you with a few jump scares at first, slowly building the tension and uncertainty. The thing about this game that I enjoy is the way the inmates, also known as variants, behave. It's like me and the boys. That's me. They are all over the asylum, and Miles crosses paths with many of them over the course of your playthrough. The game keeps you on your toes in the sense that some of the inmates are hostile, and others will just stand around and make insane declarations. On your first run-through of Outlast, you never really know how close you're able to get to certain NPCs without them attacking or disregarding you completely. It creates a feeling of unpredictability that you would expect to find in a setting such as this. This feeling is pervasive and extends into every corner of the asylum, leaving you never quite knowing what nightmare you will find just beyond the threshold of the door you are sprinting towards as fast as you can. At any rate, before Miles is able to gain access to the control room, he is met by both Chris Walker, an absolute unit of an inmate who seems intent on wearing Miles' skin, and Father Martin, an inmate claiming to be a priest who sabotages Miles' progress by cutting off the power. Miles then has to go into the basement of the asylum and restore power so that he can leave through the front door. If only it ended up being so simple. Down in the basement, the player gets their first taste of what to really expect from Outlast's gameplay loop. The basement is dark and will require you to make use of the night vision on your camera in order to progress, which in turn makes the player fully aware for the first time how quickly your batteries can drain, especially on the Nightmare difficulty setting. The game presents you with situations where you will have to use your night vision in order to proceed, unless you happen to be a speedrunner and have the layout memorized. The problem with being forced to proceed through this game is that the situations you're asked to proceed through are scary as fuck. Oh fuck! Fuck you! You didn't even see me. Oh, Jesus Christ! So your choices are to take action and dash through the horrors, or sit around and run out your batteries while you wait for that one inmate to leave the room or hallway that you're in. It's like the developers at Red Barrels knew that the player would often be too scared to keep going, but they also put you in a situation where you have to keep going, or you will end up alone in the darkness, no batteries to turn your camera on, and you'll be unable to see. The other thing I should mention is that while the camera is mainly used for seeing in the dark, which happens quite a bit, it can also be used to zoom in and allow Miles to see further away, which can be useful when planning your route or strategy as far as how to avoid whatever pursuer is looking for you at any given moment. Miles can also peek around corners to check for enemies, which can come in handy if you're more of a slower-paced player. These two things are the only real techniques available to Miles when it comes to gathering information that will allow Miles to progress safely. It really makes for a unique gameplay loop that is promoting stealth over blindly running into danger. So with this in mind, here we are, in the basement, and we need to turn on the generator. This requires us to navigate around a particularly angry inmate, turn everything on, and get back upstairs without dying, all while being under a clock of sorts with our batteries constantly draining. The other thing worth mentioning is that by turning on generators and switches, inmates will be drawn to the noise and make progression that much more difficult. You will have to hide, wait for them to leave, and then sneak past them. This style of gameplay leads with a focus on patience, which is not going to be for everyone at the end of the day. Outlast features a variety of horrifying locations just like this basement, and they all promote this sort of gameplay loop of run, sneak, hide, turn this thing on, etc. Now, if Outlast was like a 10-hour plus game, then this would be an issue. But since Outlast clocks in at around 5 hours, it's actually not so bad. You have to remember that Outlast feels a lot more like an interactive found footage horror film than it is, any kind of Resident Evil or Silent Hill type experience. I think this kind of horror game is a really valuable experience because it's not like Resident Evil or Silent Hill where you're armed to the teeth and, you can kind of just run forward. Maybe you die, but at the very least you're able to defend yourself. In Outlast, it really makes you think about how you're going to proceed before you do so, because whatever enemies you run into, you're not going to be able to defend yourself from them. So by virtue of that, the best course of action would be for you to just not run into any enemies, if you can avoid it. Hopefully, as my gameplay footage will show, Outlast really put me in some stressful ass situations, to the point where I really started to question making this the first video I made for this channel. So, after Miles turns the generator back on, he finally makes it to the control room, only to be met once again by Father Martin, who drugs Miles and shows him footage of something called the Wall Rider. The Wall Rider appears to be some sort of ghostly, supernatural entity that is absolutely laying waste to some of the military officers in the asylum. This provides a new wrinkle to the proceedings. Miles now not only has to contend with insane inmates, but also there is apparently a fucking ghost running around. After being injected with the sedative by Martin, Miles wakes up in a padded cell. Not long after leaving our cell, we run into two of the game's recurring pursuer enemies, the twins. These guys are memorable for two girthy reasons. Yo, these guys got their dicks out. The twins don't attack right away, which is almost scarier, but talk openly in front of Miles about wanting to kill him. So yeah, we'll just want to make a mental note of that. After navigating the cell block a bit more, we are forced to find a key card that will grant us access to the shower room. With the key card in hand, we begin to return to the shower room only to be knocked out a window from an explosion, and are then forced to find an alternative path to the shower room. We find ourselves soon in another pitch black cell block, and to make matters worse, our boy Chris Walker soon joins us. We juke him out and progress through the cell block, enduring various jump scares until eventually finding ourselves in the sewers of Mount Massive. As you might expect, this is a pretty miserable section of the game. Honestly, has there ever been a sewers section in a horror game that wasn't also the worst part of that game? Although if I'm being honest, every section of Outlast could be a contender for the most miserable section award, if such a thing existed. The sewers section sees Miles having to flush out the water of a lower section by turning two valves. Unfortunately for Miles, the sewers are being patrolled by Chris Walker. This guy is seriously everywhere, so get used to that. Go, 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 go! No! Oh my god! Anyway, after a few trial and error mad dashes, we managed to turn the required valves and make our way back to the dank hole in the ground known as the lower junction. Eventually we make it out of the sewers and into the male ward, where we are pursued by the twins that I mentioned from earlier. Like I said, they've used the current state of the asylum as an excuse to institute a no pants policy that they both adhere to very strictly. This makes them some of the scarier antagonists in the game, in my opinion. If Ari Aster taught me anything, it's that naked old people are fucking terrifying. Miles eludes these terrifying figures only to wind up in the clutches of another of Outlast's antagonists, Richard Traeger. Traeger is a former Murkoff employee who has seemingly been driven mad by the events of the game. His body is mutilated beyond recognition by his own hand or some other sinister cause we do not yet know. See, the thing about Traeger is that he sounds perfectly normal, despite looking like a scrapped enemy design from a Western-developed Silent Hill entry. This dichotomy is a big part of what makes Traeger stand out as one of the most effective of Outlast's pursuer enemies. A lot of popular horror games have pursuer enemies. Resident Evil has many, with Mr. X and Nemesis being the most popular, and Pyramid Head even occupying the role in a few Silent Hill titles. In those games, you eventually reach a point in the game where it comes time to fight those enemies in a boss fight. Outlast has no boss fights. Miles is able to elude or inadvertently cause the death of these pursuer enemies throughout the course of the game, usually through blind luck or happenstance. Outlast has Chris Walker, Traeger, the twins who hang dong, as well as your run-of-the-mill inmates all occupying the role of pursuer. It can become tiresome at times, having to run from all of these horrifying enemies, but it usually pays off in a satisfying, cinematic way. So, once Traeger catches you, it triggers a semi-lengthy cutscene where he wheels you through his domain, consisting of the hospital's male ward. Traeger has been given free rein to conduct all manner of torturous experiments on the more vulnerable inmates of the asylum. Traeger gets you to his operating room where he begins the process of torturing Miles. He does this by first exposing his bare ass to us. Yo, this guy's got his ass out. And as if that weren't bad enough, he follows that up by cutting off 2 of Miles's fingers. The process is thankfully cut short before we start losing even more valuable appendages. So this part of the game is more of the same. Evade Traeger while acquiring the key to the elevator that will allow us to escape. It's stressful, it sucks, but if you persevere, you will be rewarded with a pretty sweet death scene for Traeger, where he is crushed between 2 floors as he tries to murder you in the elevator. After the harrowing experience he puts us through, this feels pretty damn good, and is another example of how Miles is able to triumph over these pursuers, despite not actually fighting back much. From the male ward, Miles meets up with Father Martin again, who advises Miles to make his way to the chapel. In the process of doing so, we must first turn on a sprinkler system to put out a fire, while avoiding Chris Walker, then navigate a courtyard which is being patrolled by, you guessed it, Chris Walker. We also have another run-in with the Wall Rider, who, come to think of it, could be classified as yet another pursuer enemy, although it doesn't appear as often as the others I listed earlier. After avoiding both Walker and the Wall Rider, we eventually find ourselves in the female ward. At this point, we are faced with the task of finding 3 fuses in order to gain access to a laundry chute that is currently being occupied by the corpse of a security guard who has a key that we will need to progress. You know the drill by now. Avoid inmates, navigate the adjacent rooms and hallways for the fuses, pass go, collect $200. Eventually we get the key which will allow us access to the 3rd floor. Remember those twins I mentioned earlier? The ones who like to run around in their birthday suits? Well, I hope you missed them because they are back and they are very much still naked. Once we make our way past them, we will trigger a cutscene where we attempt a particularly challenging jump, which we sort of land, but we lose our camera in the process. This moment in Outlast is very impactful. The camera has been our one and only saving grace throughout this entire experience, and I really was surprised when I played this for the first time and lost it. Watching it fall through the floors of the dilapidated asylum feels the way I assume Tom Hanks felt when he lost Wilson. In order to progress, we need to go back down into the darkness of the hospital and get our camera back. Despite being an impactful moment, everything is thankfully lit pretty well down here, so the effect of being cameraless is somewhat diminished. Nonetheless, it's a pretty effective sequence that sees Miles getting his camera back and hauling ass the way he came, now sporting a cracked lens in the camera's viewfinder. This part of the game is where memorizing the asylum's layout and having a good sense of direction is really helpful in Outlast. It's mostly intuitive making your way through, but the times when it's not, you really regret not having paid closer attention. More than once I found myself frantically looking for the way to go as an inmate absolutely beat my ass with a pipe. After this sequence, we find ourselves back in the administration block from the beginning of the game. From here, we avoid Chris Walker yet again and make our way to the recreation hall. Here, the player can choose to watch a home video detailing the circumstances surrounding something called the morphogenic engine, something that we've gleaned information on here and there throughout the various documents scattered around the asylum. We discover that the Wall Rider and the morphogenic engine are connected, as well as information regarding the man behind it all, Rudolf Wernicke, a German scientist who came to the US during Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was a real secret program after World War II where the US basically recruited a lot of German scientists and made them work for us rather than just imprisoning them or taking them out. In addition to Operation Paperclip, we further learned that Wernicke committed crimes that were also linked to MKUltra, another real government study where the CIA basically experimented on humans, which comes full circle into the plot of Outlast. I think something that really adds to the scare factor of Outlast is how the plot includes these very real-world events. These events were ethically questionable at best, and add a deeper sense of realism to the plot. The morphogenic engine itself and the events leading up to the creation of the Wall Rider are a bit fantastical, admittedly, but the bureaucratic details surrounding them are very much rooted in reality. There are plausible circumstances here that don't actually compromise our suspension of disbelief as the player. Furthermore, Outlast is a game with a surprising amount of lore. In addition to the sequel and the prequel, there are a handful of comic books that also go into the events of the Murkoff Corporation and Mount Massive, and all the events preceding the first game. If you want to find out just how deep the Outlast rabbit hole goes, I would suggest checking out those comic books because they are pretty interesting. At this point in the story, Miles has almost solved the mystery of what's going on at Mount Massive, but at what cost? From the rec hall, we progress into the chapel where we meet Martin again. Along the way, we see that a lot of inmates have become passive and assumed an eerie praying position. Arriving at the chapel, we discover that Martin has decided to immolate himself in a pretty harrowing scene. Given everything that's been going on, this actually seems like a halfway sensible way to go out. After this, Miles leaves the chapel and makes his way to the elevator that Martin graciously fixed for us before his demise. For what feels like the 50th time, we avoid Chris Walker and find ourselves descending deep below the asylum. This is where Outlast hits us with a change of scenery by revealing that Murkoff has a clinical research lab and military facility underneath the asylum, where they've been conducting their experiments with the morphogenic engine. The look of this place is very sterile and very brightly lit, which is a welcome change from the oppressive darkness that we've grown used to. After exploring this underground base for a bit, we're chased by the Wall Rider until we come face to face for the final time with Chris Walker, who seems to have inexplicably followed us down here. In a twist of fate, the Wall Rider attacks Walker instead and tosses him around like a sack of potatoes before finally eviscerating him. Farewell, Walker, you will not be missed. With Walker dead, we are safe for the time being. From here, we finally come face to face with Wernicke, the one responsible for essentially everything that's gone wrong here, Project Wall Rider. From what we're able to gather, the morphogenic engine was a project where Murkoff would take inmates of the asylum and use them as test subjects. The Murkoff Corporation took over Mount Massive under the guise of being a non-profit organization, but it was really just to have unlimited access to test subjects without police scrutiny. These test subjects would be tortured to the point of becoming insane, at which time they would enter a lucid dream state that would then allow them to control a swarm of nanobots that manifested as the Wall Rider, which would then be used as a weapon that would be sold to the military. They failed many times to produce a suitable host for the Wall Rider, until finally one patient named Billy Hope succeeded in becoming the first. However, to no one's surprise, the experiment doesn't go well, and the Wall Rider wreaks havoc on Mount Massive, leading to the state of affairs that Miles encountered on his arrival to the hospital. After finally learning about what the hell's actually been going on here, Wernicke tasks Miles with the mission of turning off Billy's life support, which is supposed to kill the Wall Rider in the process, thus putting an end to the experiment once and for all. Miles is eventually able to put Billy out of his misery after turning off his life support, whilst avoiding the Wall Rider, which can only fully be seen through Miles' camera. The process of being chased by the Wall Rider leaves Miles badly hurt. He limps his way out of the lab only to be faced with Wernicke and a squad of soldiers. Miles, in an extremely weakened state, can only put his hands up as he is tragically shot by the squad. A pretty depressing end after everything we've been through, to be honest. However, despite having killed Billy, the Wall Rider is seemingly unbound and latches onto Miles as its next host as he is killed by the military. Miles, having been driven to the brink of insanity by the events of the game, has unwittingly made himself a prime candidate for the Wall Rider, who is drawn to those exposed to extreme fear and trauma. The screen cuts to black as it is implied that Miles, as the new Wall Rider, destroys Wernicke and his squad of soldiers. So there is a bit of poetic justice to be had, albeit in a bittersweet sort of way. So that's it. That's the story of Outlast. We're finally done. The nightmare is over. Fuck, I forgot about Whistleblower. Imagine my dismay when I finally rolled credits on Outlast, returned to the main menu, and was promptly reminded of the existence of the Whistleblower DLC. Funnily enough, despite having beaten Outlast over a decade ago at this point, I never actually finished the DLC, so I knew that if I was going to make this video, then I would have to experience Whistleblower and, as a result, Outlast in its entirety. Remember in the beginning of Outlast when Miles gets that anonymous tip? Well, we have Waylon Park to thank for that, the protagonist of Whistleblower and a software engineer working for the Murkoff Corporation. Waylon is the titular whistleblower. He witnesses a lot of sketchy shit going on, in particular some close encounters with the morphogenic engine itself, and the torture that it is inflicting on the unwilling patients. After witnessing a particularly messed up torture session, Wayland has apparently seen enough and decides to send the DLC's titular email to Miles, naively thinking that he would not be detected by Murkoff. Enter Jeremy Blair, a main antagonist of Whistleblower. He is the one who catches Wayland and forces him into the morphogenic engine program against his will, as punishment for blowing the whistle, as it were. In a fortuitous twist of fate, the Walrider escapes containment and begins to wreak havoc on the asylum and provides the necessary distractions required for Wayland to escape. Wayland quickly arms himself with a video camera, seeking to further document the atrocities being committed by Murkoff. During Whistleblower, which is about a 2-hour experience at most, Wayland makes his way through some familiar locations from the base game, as well as mainly new areas. When I first loaded up Whistleblower, I remember kind of cynically assuming that the DLC would probably reuse a lot of the same locations and assets from the base game, but that's only partially true. Whistleblower is actually a very worthy expansion. It expands on the lore, it adds a lot of new locations and new pursuer enemies, because of course we have to have more of that. Wayland spends the early sections of Whistleblower on the run from a prisoner named Frank Manera, who is committed to showing Wayland his new electric saw every chance he gets. Frank is more or less a standard pursuer without much to him, clothes included. Wayland's mission to escape Mount Massive begins with finding a radio somewhere on the premises that he can use to get help and finally alert the outside world of what's going on here. The door to progress is locked by a pair of handcuffs and requires us to find a key, and in order to do so, we will of course have to navigate around our boy Frank and his saw. Wayland is not as interested in power tools as Frank, so we avoid him for a while until he jump scares the shit out of us, throws us in an oven, and tries to cook us alive. Thankfully, this place seems to have skimped on oven maintenance over the years, and the oven door is in pretty rough shape, allowing Wayland to bash his way to freedom. From here, Wayland begins to ascend to a higher floor of the asylum, whilst having visions of the Walrider, a lingering side effect from his time in the morphogenic engine. Soon enough, we run right back into our boy Frank. Jesus Christ, bro. Where'd you even come from, man? He is playing heavy defense here as we try to achieve our main goal. Shut off the main gas valve so that we can access the airlock we need to enter in order to progress to the radio. Through sheer perseverance, I was able to break Frank's ankles and finally turn the valve, allowing me to get closer to accessing the radio. We navigate a courtyard of the asylum for a bit and interrupt a pickup game some of the inmates are partaking in. Oh, y'all are hooping. Just relax. I got next. After calling next, I am forced to leave by some of the more violent variants and head back into the asylum, where at last I find the radio and attempt to call for help. Unfortunately, Jeremy Blair is here and quickly sabotages my efforts to do so, determined to hide what's going on at Mount Massive. Jeremy is about to put me out of my misery when Chris Walker arrives, forcing Jeremy to flee. At this point in the game, I am an expert in crossing up these pursuers and quickly elude him. From here, my next goal is to just straight up get out of Dodge via the administration block, a location we will recognize from the base game. We quickly run into Father Martin, who seems unaware of our presence. Oh, what's up, dude? Yeah, I remember you. Alright, man, well, I'm gonna catch up with you later, bro. You just hang out and, avoid any, crosses or anything like that. I can't stay long, so I advise him to stay away from crosses or anything overly hot, and get on my merry way. Chris Walker appears once again. This time I don't even see him, but I hear his chains rattling, so I do what I do best and sprint out of there, parkouring over some tables as I do. From here, I find myself in another outside courtyard where I need to turn off the electricity being pumped through a nearby fence that I need to pass through. I find the lever to turn off the electricity quickly enough, but not before encountering an inmate who is just absolutely going to town on his hog. I admired his corn-shucking abilities for a moment before reminding myself of the task at hand and kept it pushing. I made my way back to the fence where, right before approaching, I see that the power has been turned back on. Now, at this point I got a little confused and wrongly assumed that there must be a separate lever somewhere that I needed to find and pull, not that the same lever I'd already pulled needed to be pulled again. After this realization, I made my way back to the original lever, and sure enough, it needed to be pulled once more. Speaking of pulling things, the inmate I observed earlier appears to have found time in his busy cranking schedule to chase me around a bit instead. To make matters worse, you just know that this guy did not wash his hands. I make a beeline for the now de-electrified fence and continue to progress one step closer to getting the hell out of this place. From here I begin to ascend a tower of some sort and attempt what would have been a sick jump if not for the fact that I totally botch it and wind up falling a good distance to the ground. I have somehow entered the vocational block where an inmate named Dennis with a DID is talking to himself about offering me up as some sort of sacrifice to someone named Gluskin. This section of the game features a lot of crawling under obstacles, sliding through barricades and such as we tried to progress. Eventually, a musical cue lets us know that we are in the presence of pursuers and we need to start hauling ass once more. Dennis starts referring to Gluskin as the groom and Wayland Park, me, as the bride as we are running for our lives. For reasons I need not explain, this is very troubling to hear, and unfortunately it will only get more concerning for us from here on out. We then discover such a grisly tableau that I'm fairly certain I can't show it on YouTube, further exacerbating my panicked state and signaling that we are likely entering the final stages of the Whistleblower DLC. What the fuck? Sure enough, we are soon given our first look at Eddie Gluskin via jump scare.
God,
Jesus. Eddie is the final boss of Whistleblower, an extremely disturbing pursuer who has plans for Wayland. Eddie was one of the patients at the beginning of Whistleblower who was subjected to the morphogenic engine. The experiment left Eddie insane and has been spending his time searching for a bride. Being that the asylum consists of biologically male inmates, this creates a bit of a conundrum for Gluskin, who prefers his bride be anatomically female. This leads Gluskin to conduct a particular type of torture on his potential brides, one that I won't describe in detail, but I'm sure you can probably piece together what I'm talking about. We evade Gluskin up until the point where we make another death-defying leap into an elevator shaft. The ladder we grabbed onto breaks under our weight, causing us to break our leg in the process, but granting us a temporary reprieve from Gluskin's pursuit. This is Whistleblower implementing a game design from the base game, which is where they handicap our main character in the final stages of the game. Outlast sees Miles with a partially broken camera, while Whistleblower doubles down and breaks Wayland's leg, causing us to limp for the duration of the DLC. This is an immersive way to deliver consequences to the player and actually have it affect the gameplay to a degree. We can feel the effect of our injury, making the chasing sections that much more tense as we don't feel as fast as we were. After injuring our leg, we eventually find ourselves hiding from Gluskin in a locker. He finds us, and rather than attacking, he gasses us instead, causing Wayland to pass out. We wake up 12 hours later just in time to see Gluskin mutilating other inmates in the fashion that I alluded to earlier. As you might have guessed, Gluskin then proceeds to enact this procedure on Wayland, stripping us of our clothes and placing us on a table complete with buzzsaw. Right before the unimaginable happens, a random inmate bursts in and attacks Gluskin, giving us just enough time to escape our constraints, grab the camcorder, and throw some pants on for good measure. For the amount of running Wayland does, he really can't afford to be going commando, especially with buzzsaws and such, just kind of every which way. Sufficiently traumatized, we start to limp our way out of this place. Gluskin appears again, we run away, eventually jumping out a window and injuring ourselves even further in the process. From here, our final goal is set in motion. We must find a key to access the male ward and get our ass the hell out of here. We eventually find the key, run from Gluskin one last time, and open the door, triggering a cutscene with Gluskin where he attempts to hang us in the gymnasium. This cutscene provides a visual that gives us a horrific realization. Gluskin has done this to hundreds of other prisoners before Waylon, implying that we would have very likely not been the last victim of Gluskin's mania. In the process of trying to hang us, a struggle ensues and Waylon is able to reverse things and causes Gluskin himself to become tangled up and eventually impaled by a nearby metal bar. Finally free of Outlast's most disturbing pursuer, Waylon makes his way to the administrative block and discovers that Murkov's military forces have arrived and begun to kill everyone in sight, inmate or otherwise. The Walrider arrives not long after this and begins to kill the soldiers, adding to the bloodbath. Waylon arrives at the main atrium, the same place that Miles begins the game in. Here we find Jeremy Blair, wounded but still alive. Waylon approaches and is stabbed by Jeremy, determined to make sure what happened here doesn't get out, even if it means he dies too. Dude was really a corporate shill to the bitter end. The Walrider appears again, who is actually using Miles as its host at this point, and makes quick work of Jeremy. Waylon uses this opportunity to escape, running outside and towards the jeep that Miles left behind what feels like months ago at this point. Now, since I had never actually finished Whistleblower before, I thought for sure Waylon was gonna die similarly to Miles. But nope. Waylon fires up the jeep and escapes as the Walrider looks on from afar. It's quite poetic that Miles, despite meeting his end, is able to help Waylon escape the nightmare of Mount Massive. If he hadn't sent that email, he never would have made it out of here. Shout out to Miles, you were a real one. In an epilogue scene, Waylon has partnered with an organization that will help leak all of the footage that Waylon took during his experience at Mount Massive. The game ends with Waylon being told that he will be able to ruin Murkoff, but that retaliation will be almost certain. Despite this, Waylon leaks the footage anyway as the credits roll. And that is Whistleblower done, and with it, Outlast as a whole is complete. Speaking on Whistleblower itself, I think it's a really, really great DLC. It only took me around 100 minutes to finish, but given that Outlast itself is not a very long game, it felt very appropriately paced to me. The DLC ties up all the loose ends, provides more information on how things went down the way they did at Mount Massive, and makes great use of new environments and pursuers, while seamlessly tying them in with existing areas and enemies, making the game feel complete in a way that it otherwise might not have if Whistleblower didn't exist. So, the question remains, is Outlast still scary over a decade later? If it wasn't obvious, the answer is yes. Outlast provides an experience that, at the time, was still unlike what most horror games were providing. As we talked about, Amnesia was certainly the blueprint, but Outlast took that premise and in many ways improved upon it and expanded it to an even wider audience. Amnesia was more puzzle-focused, featured a sanity mechanic, and overall relied more on hiding, as opposed to all of the running that Outlast has you doing. Nonetheless, in the same way that Amnesia undoubtedly inspired Outlast, Outlast went on to inspire other games. Titles like Layers of Fear, Blair Witch, and even Resident Evil 7 to a degree were all inspired by Outlast in one way or another. There's something to be said for games that know what they are and seek to deliver a specific experience.
The concept itself came from a combination of ideas and also the fact that we knew we would be a small team, so we had to scope very wisely. So obviously one location is less expensive than multiple locations, so and the asylum felt like something that it's been done several times in movies, but not as much in games and maybe not recently, so we were confident we could do a good twist with it.
Outlast may be a linear, on-rails horror game, but it manages to establish rich lore through the in-game documents as well as the supplementary material that came out after the fact. Things go even further in the sequel, Outlast 2, which we will talk about in a future video, but here in the original game from 2013, what you have is a well-crafted, haunted house thrill ride that never lets up. There are moments of relief where you escape a particularly relentless pursuer, only to be reminded that your situation has only marginally improved, and in no time at all, you are sure to find yourself in an even worse position. Outlast's immersion is second to none. The game's HUD is limited to the display of the camera, which is quite a nice touch. Red Barrels sought to ask the question, what would happen if you stripped away all the healing items, maps, and weapons, and put a regular person in a horror scenario? And they never stray away from that premise. With this in mind, I think it is fair to say that Outlast is not only still scary, but timeless when you consider this approach that Red Barrels opted to take. The gameplay loop might be repetitive, the lack of interactivity and resources might turn off some players, and Miles and Waylon are pretty one-dimensional characters. But for those looking to experience a compelling narrative and undergo a stressful, horror film type experience, look no further than Outlast. In a world of Resident Evils, Dead Spaces, and Silent Hills, Outlast still feels singular in its approach to horror, providing players one resource, and having that resource simultaneously be a method for the game to further heighten the scares, well, it's genius. The camera mechanic takes an already scary scenario, puts the player on a clock, asks you to navigate the scenario before your batteries run out. And on top of all that, the night vision just makes what you're seeing look even creepier. There's something about being able to see things in the dark that you otherwise shouldn't be able to see. That just gets under your skin. That is what Outlast excels at, and that is why Outlast is absolutely still scary. Alright guys, so if you made it to the end of this video, thanks so much for sticking around and listening to me talk about why I think Outlast is still incredibly scary all these years later. What I would love now is to hear from you guys. Leave your feedback down in the comments. Let me know what you thought of the video. Let me know what you think of Outlast as a game. Yeah, just leave it all down in the comments. I genuinely would love to hear from you guys. In addition, let me know what games you'd like to see me cover next. I have some ideas in my head, but I definitely would not mind hearing from you guys. With all that being said, like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't, keep gaming, and stay scared.